When we speak about Dajjal, the first responsibility upon us is honesty. Honesty with our sources, honesty with our intellect, and honesty with our faith. Too often, the mention of Dajjal immediately triggers sensational images, conspiracy theories, and fear-based narratives that were never rooted in the Qur'an or authentic Sunnah. Islam does not teach us to approach trials with hysteria. It teaches us to approach them with clarity, and clarity begins by understanding who Dajjal is according to authentic Islamic teachings, not according to social media, folklore, or political speculation. The Prophet spoke about Dajjal repeatedly, and he did so not to frighten the believers, but to prepare them. Dajjal is described as a real individual, not a metaphor, not a system alone, and not a symbolic idea detached from reality. At the same time, Islam does not reduce Dajjal to physical oddities or dramatic imagery. Yes, there are descriptions, his deception, his claims, his limitations, but the Prophet consistently emphasized something deeper. The danger of Dajjal lies not in how he looks, but in what he does to the human mind and soul. This is where many people misunderstand the concept. They imagine that when Dajjal appears, deception will be obvious, that only foolish people will follow him, that true believers will instantly recognize falsehood. But the Prophet warned even the strongest believers to seek Allah's protection from Dajjal in every prayer. Why would that be necessary if the test were simple? The reality is that Dajjal's fitnah is designed to confuse intelligence, to exploit fear, and to manipulate human weakness. He will not come saying, "I am falsehood." He will come wrapped in logic, solutions, power, and apparent mercy. Islam teaches us that Dajjal will claim divinity, but that claim will not be crude. It will be gradual, persuasive, and reinforced by apparent control over worldly outcomes, provision, safety, and survival, and this is psychologically profound. Human beings, when placed under pressure, often trade principles for protection. When food becomes scarce, truth becomes negotiable. When fear dominates, morality weakens. Dajjal exploits this reality. He does not invent human weakness, he weaponizes it. This is why the Prophet focused less on describing Dajjal's body and more on training the believer's heart. The message is subtle but powerful. If your faith is shallow, if your attachment to Allah is conditional, if your understanding of truth depends on comfort, then Dajjal will not need to force you. You will walk toward him willingly, convinced you are making a rational choice. And that is the most dangerous form of deception, the one that feels intelligent. Another common mistake is to think of Dajjal as a supernatural being outside the laws of Allah. Islam is very clear, Dajjal is not divine. He eats, he drinks, he is limited, and he will ultimately be defeated. Allah allows his trial not because falsehood is strong, but because human beings must be tested. Faith that is never challenged is not faith, it is habit. Dajjal represents the ultimate exposure of what people truly worship. Allah or power, Allah or survival, Allah or control. The Prophet described Dajjal as having one eye, while Allah is perfect and free from deficiency. This is not merely a physical description, it carries philosophical depth. Dajjal sees only one dimension of reality, the material world, power, wealth, dominance, and immediate results. He is blind to the unseen, blind to accountability, blind to the hereafter. And those who follow him adopt the same vision. They begin to see life through one eye only. Success becomes material, truth becomes flexible, morality becomes an inconvenience. This is why Dajjal is not just a future problem, he is a mirror. Long before his arrival, the mindset he represents already exists. Any system, ideology, or leadership that demands you compromise your faith for safety, your ethics for success, or your soul for comfort is preparing you psychologically for Dajjal. The Prophet warned us not so that we could point fingers, but so that we could examine ourselves, and here is where balance is essential. Islam does not call us to paranoia. We are not instructed to search for Dajjal in every event or label every global change as his arrival. That obsession itself can weaken faith because it distracts from personal responsibility. The Prophet taught preparation, not fixation. Strengthen your belief, deepen your knowledge, anchor your identity in Allah. If those foundations are strong, no deception, no matter how polished, will shake you. Understanding who Dajjal is also corrects another dangerous error, the belief that intelligence alone protects a person. History proves otherwise. Some of the most educated societies have fallen into the most destructive ideologies. Intelligence without humility becomes arrogance. Knowledge without guidance becomes a tool of self-justification. Dajjal appeals to intellect stripped of spirituality, to reason divorced from revelation. That is why the Prophet linked protection from Dajjal to remembrance, to Surah al-Kahf, to constant awareness of Allah. These are not rituals without meaning. They train the mind to see beyond appearances, to question power, and to recognize that truth does not bend to convenience. So when we speak about Dajjal, we are not speaking about a distant figure alone. We are speaking about the kind of believer we are becoming. Are we training ourselves to recognize truth when it is uncomfortable? Are we strengthening our relationship with Allah beyond cultural Islam? Are we prepared to stand firm when obedience costs us something? Because when deception comes in its most convincing form, only a heart anchored in Allah will remain unmoved. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The real preparation for Dajjal does not begin with fear of the future. It begins with sincerity today. When the Prophet spoke about the fitna of Dajjal, he did not describe it as a simple lie that people would immediately recognize and reject. He described it as the greatest trial humanity would ever face. That alone should make us pause, because a great trial is not great due to noise or chaos. It is great because it is convincing. It does not knock on the door as falsehood. It enters as a solution. And this is where the danger truly lies. The nature of Dajjal's fitna is deeply psychological. It targets the human need for certainty in uncertain times. When societies experience fear, instability, and confusion, people do not necessarily look for truth. They look for relief. They look for someone who sounds confident, who promises order, who claims to have answers. Dajjal's strength will not be brute force alone. It will be his ability to speak to the anxieties people already carry within themselves. Think about how easily people compromise principles today when pressure is applied. How quickly ethics change when survival is threatened. How often truth becomes negotiable when comfort is at stake. Dajjal's deception operates on this exact weakness. He offers what appears to be security in exchange for loyalty, provision in exchange for submission, and certainty in exchange for conscience. And many will not feel as though they are betraying truth. They will feel as though they are being practical. The Prophet warned that Dajjal will present falsehood in a form that resembles truth. This is critical. The most effective lies are not entirely false. They are mixtures, a little truth wrapped in a dangerous conclusion, a real problem followed by a corrupt solution, a genuine crisis followed by a response that quietly replaces Allah with control. This is how deception works at its highest level. It does not ask you to deny reality, it asks you to reinterpret it. Dajjal's fitna will also be ideological. He will reshape values, redefine success, and reframe morality. What was once considered wrong will be justified as necessary. What was once sacred will be labeled as outdated. What was once oppression will be renamed protection. And the terrifying part is that many people will applaud this shift, not because they are evil, but because they are tired. Tired of instability, tired of uncertainty, tired of waiting for justice from Allah instead of demanding immediate results. This is why the Prophet emphasized that Dajjal will deceive even intelligent people. Intelligence alone is not a shield. In fact, intelligence without humility can become a weakness. A person who trusts only their intellect may believe they are immune to manipulation, while their ego quietly opens the door. Dajjal does not target ignorance alone, he targets arrogance, the belief that I could never be fooled. One of the most striking aspects of Dajjal's fitna is how it exploits the human attachment to the material world. He will appear to control resources, food, water, wealth. In times of scarcity, this is powerful. A hungry person does not argue philosophy, they think about survival. A fearful person does not reflect deeply, they seek protection. This is why the Prophet described people following Dajjal simply because he feeds them. This is not a condemnation, it is a warning. Hunger can silence the conscience, fear can blind the heart, and yet this is not unique to the future. We see traces of this mentality even now. How often do people justify injustice because it brings economic stability? How often is silence chosen because speaking truth is inconvenient? How often are moral compromises defended as realistic? These are not signs of Dajjal's arrival, they are signs of Dajjal, like thinking. The fitna begins long before the person appears. Another dimension of Dajjal's deception is emotional manipulation. He will exploit grief, loss, and longing. There are narrations that he will claim the ability to bring back loved ones, creating illusions that feel deeply personal. Imagine a mother who has lost a child. Imagine a person broken by loneliness. Imagine someone desperate for meaning. Dajjal's deception will not always be public. Sometimes it will be intimate. He will meet people at their weakest moments and present false hope as mercy. This teaches us something essential. Vulnerability without guidance is dangerous. Emotional pain without spiritual grounding makes people susceptible to any voice that sounds compassionate. This is why Islam never separates emotional healing from faith. Comfort without truth is a trap. Relief without Allah is temporary and often destructive. The Prophet also warned that Dajjal's fitna will spread rapidly, like rain carried by the wind. This suggests influence, communication, and reach. Ideas spreading faster than wisdom, narratives overpowering reflection, the speed of deception leaving little room for contemplation. In such an environment, people do not ask, "Is this true?" They ask, "Is everyone else accepting this?" And social pressure becomes a powerful force. Many will follow not because they are convinced, but because they do not want to be isolated. This is why the believer is trained to stand alone if necessary. Truth has never been dependent on numbers. The Qur'an repeatedly reminds us that the majority is not a measure of correctness. Dajjal's fitna will test this principle at the highest level. It will ask, do you follow Allah when it costs you popularity, security, or belonging? Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Dajjal's deception is that he will frame submission as liberation. He will argue that obedience to him frees people from chaos, that surrendering values brings peace, that questioning authority is the real threat. And people who fear disorder will accept this logic, slowly, willingly, convincingly, but Islam teaches us something radically different. True peace comes from submission to Allah alone. Any system that demands absolute loyalty while marginalizing divine guidance is not neutral. It is falsehood dressed as order. The Prophet warned us about Dajjal not to make us suspicious of the world, but to make us aware of ourselves. Are we building a relationship with Allah that remains firm under pressure, or is our faith strong only when life is comfortable? Do we value truth when it benefits us, or even when it costs us? This is why the protection from Dajjal is not found in panic or obsession, but in inner strength. A heart that knows Allah cannot be bribed. A soul that trusts the hereafter cannot be intimidated. A believer who understands that provision comes from Allah cannot be blackmailed by scarcity. And here lies the final reflection for this part of the journey. Dajjal's greatest weapon is not his power, it is our weakness. The more we purify our intentions, strengthen our principles, and detach from unhealthy dependence on the world, the smaller his fitna becomes. Because deception only succeeds where truth is neglected, and the one who chooses Allah consistently, especially when it is difficult, has already defeated Dajjal before ever meeting him. When the Prophet spoke about the followers of Dajjal, he mentioned different groups, different people, different backgrounds. Among those narrations, there are references that many of Dajjal's followers will be from the Jews. This is where responsibility becomes critical, because how we understand this determines whether knowledge enlightens us or ignorance poisons us. Islam does not allow careless interpretation, emotional reaction, or collective blame. If this topic is approached without wisdom, it can distort faith instead of strengthening it. The first principle we must establish clearly is this: Islam never teaches collective guilt. The Qur'an is explicit that no soul bears the burden of another. Righteousness and wrongdoing are individual, not inherited, not ethnic, not tribal. The Qur'an praises righteous people among every group and condemns wrongdoing among every group. This includes Muslims themselves. So any understanding of these narrations that turns into hatred toward an entire people is already a misunderstanding of Islam. So why, then, are Jews mentioned in some authentic narrations regarding Dajjal? The answer is not racial, political, or emotional. It is theological and historical. The Prophet was not identifying bloodlines, he was identifying belief patterns. He was not pointing to DNA, He was pointing to ideology. To understand this properly, we must understand how Islam views religious history. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are not strangers to one another. They share prophets, scriptures, and moral foundations. But where divergence occurred was not in lineage, it was in beliefs about authority, truth, and divine guidance. One of the central theological differences between Islam and Judaism is the rejection of Isa as the Messiah. This matters deeply in the discussion of Dajjal. Dajjal presents himself as a false Messiah, and for a community still awaiting a Messiah, the danger of accepting a false one is naturally greater. This is not an insult, it is a logical reality. If someone is expecting a figure to arrive, and that figure appears with power, dominance, and global influence, the temptation to accept him is strong. The Prophet was identifying this vulnerability, not condemning an ethnicity. At the same time, Islam teaches us that many Jews will not follow Dajjal, just as many Muslims will follow him, just as many Christians will follow him, just as people with no religious identity at all will follow him. The Qur'an itself warns Muslims repeatedly that faith is not guaranteed by identity. Being born into Islam does not protect a person from misguidance if belief is shallow and obedience is conditional. This is why the Prophet warned the Ummah more than anyone else about Dajjal. He did not say, "Others will be tested." He said, "I fear for you." That alone should silence any arrogance. If Muslims were immune, there would be no need for constant warnings, daily and repeated reminders. Another mistake people make is reading these narrations through modern political conflicts. That is intellectually lazy and spiritually dangerous. The Prophet was not delivering political analysis, he was delivering moral warnings. To project contemporary grievances onto prophetic narrations is to reduce timeless guidance into temporary anger. Islam does not need our rage, it needs our understanding. When the Prophet mentioned that many of Dajjal's followers would be from the Jews, he also mentioned women, Bedouins, and others. Are these insults? No. They are indicators of vulnerability at specific levels: emotional, social, economic, or theological. The purpose is not to accuse but to caution. A warning is not an attack. A diagnosis is not hatred, and here is something deeply important. The Qur'an itself records statements from Jews who are humble, just, and righteous. It praises them for their knowledge, their worship, and their sincerity. At the same time, it criticizes wrongdoing where it exists. The Qur'an does the same with Muslims. It exposes hypocrisy within the Ummah more harshly than it does with any other group. Why? Because closeness to truth brings greater responsibility. So when Muslims misuse narrations about Dajjal to justify hatred, mockery, or violence, they are not defending Islam, they are betraying it. Dajjal does not need followers who openly declare falsehood. He needs followers who abandon justice while claiming righteousness. Injustice is one of the fastest ways to lose Allah's support. There is also a psychological dimension we must not ignore. Humans like simple enemies. It gives comfort to say the danger is them, not us. But Islam never allows this luxury. The Qur'an repeatedly turns the mirror inward. It asks, what are you following? What are you compromising? What are you justifying? Dajjal's real followers are not defined by ethnicity, but by allegiance to falsehood. Anyone who prioritizes power over truth, benefit over ethics, control over compassion is already aligned with his mindset, whether they realize it or not. This is uncomfortable, but it is honest. This is why the Prophet never instructed Muslims to hunt for Dajjal's followers. He instructed them to protect their hearts. He taught not accusations. He taught humility, not superiority. He taught awareness, not obsession. Another critical point is that Islam does not teach us to fear people. It teaches us to fear deviation. Hatred distracts from self. Discipline, anger replaces reflection. And once that happens, the believer becomes emotionally driven instead of morally guided. This emotional instability is precisely what Dajjal exploits. Think about it carefully. If Dajjal thrives on division, fear, and blind loyalty, then spreading hatred in the name of religion is not resistance, it is cooperation. The believer resists Dajjal by being just when others are unjust, calm when others are hysterical, principled when others are reactive. The Prophet described the followers of Dajjal so that believers could recognize the pattern, not attack the people. Patterns of belief, patterns of loyalty, patterns of compromise. The moment Muslims reduce this conversation to us versus them, they miss the entire lesson, and perhaps the most humbling truth of all is this: proximity to revelation does not guarantee obedience to it. History proves this again and again. Bani Israel witnessed miracles, yet some disobeyed. The companions lived with the Prophet, yet some later faltered. Knowledge increases responsibility, not immunity. So the real question is not who will follow Dajjal. The real question is, what kind of person am I becoming? Am I training my soul to submit to Allah even when it is inconvenient? Or am I slowly normalizing compromises because they feel practical? If a believer leaves this discussion feeling superior, something has gone wrong. But if they leave feeling more cautious about their own heart, more committed to justice, and more aware of deception, then the purpose has been fulfilled. Because the greatest protection from Dajjal is not knowing who might follow him. It is ensuring that you never do. And the one who guards their heart with humility, justice, and sincerity will never need hatred to feel secure. For Allah himself will be enough. When we ask why Dajjal will attract followers, we must resist the temptation to give shallow answers. It is easy to say people will follow him because they are evil, misguided, or ignorant. That explanation is comforting, but it is also dishonest. The Prophet did not describe Dajjal's followers as monsters. He described them as human beings responding to fear, pressure, and desire, and that is precisely why this fitna is so dangerous. It works with human nature, not against it. Dajjal does not invite people to falsehood by attacking their interests. He aligns himself with them. He understands that most people do not wake up wanting to be wrong. They wake up wanting to be safe. They want stability. They want dignity. They want control over their future. When these needs are threatened, people become flexible with principles they once claimed were unshakable. The Prophet described that Dajjal will offer protection in a time of chaos. Chaos weakens conviction. When systems collapse, when trust erodes, when fear becomes constant, people stop asking what is right and start asking what works. Dajjal steps into that moment not as a villain, but as an organizer, a provider, a stabilizer. He presents himself as the solution to disorder, and for many, that alone is enough. This is psychologically powerful. Fear narrows moral vision. A frightened mind prioritizes survival over ethics. This is why history shows us that during times of crisis, people often surrender freedoms willingly. They accept injustice in the name of order. They tolerate oppression in the name of safety. Dajjal will exploit this instinct masterfully. He will argue that obedience to him is the price of peace, and many will agree, believing they are making a responsible choice. Another reason Dajjal will attract followers is his promise of provision. The Prophet described that he will appear to control resources, food, rain, wealth. Whether literal or perceived, the message is clear. He presents himself as the gatekeeper of survival. And when basic needs are threatened, faith becomes difficult for those whose belief has not been deeply rooted. Hunger humbles the body, but it also tests the soul. A person who believes provision comes only from Allah can endure scarcity with dignity. A person whose faith is conditional begins to bargain. They tell themselves, Allah understands. They tell themselves, this is temporary. Slowly, compromise becomes habit, and eventually, surrender feels logical. This is why the Prophet warned that people will follow Dajjal simply because he feeds them. This is not mockery, it is mercy. It is a warning to strengthen faith before desperation arrives. Because once survival becomes the priority, truth often becomes negotiable. Dajjal will also attract followers through the promise of power. People have always been drawn to strength. To be aligned with the winning side feels secure. To belong to authority feels empowering. Dajjal will present himself as unstoppable. Resistance will look futile, and many will conclude that opposition is pointless, even irresponsible. This reveals another human weakness, the desire to belong to dominance rather than stand with truth. Standing alone is uncomfortable. Standing against power is frightening. And unless a person's sense of identity is anchored in Allah, they will look for safety in numbers and strength in submission. Dajjal does not need loyalty driven by love. Fear is enough. Another layer of attraction is the promise of relevance. Dajjal will make people feel seen, included, important. He will give roles, recognition, and a sense of purpose. Many people are not loyal to truth. They are loyal to validation. When someone gives them a voice, they defend them fiercely, even when wrong. This is especially dangerous for those who feel ignored, marginalized, or humiliated. Islam understands this deeply. This is why the Prophet emphasized dignity rooted in faith, not status. A person who knows their worth comes from Allah does not need false empowerment, but a person whose self-worth depends on external approval is easily manipulated. Dajjal will also be persuasive. He will speak with confidence. He will sound certain in an uncertain world, and certainty is intoxicating. People often mistake confidence for correctness. A loud voice feels convincing when truth feels complex. Dajjal will simplify reality into slogans, promises, and clear enemies. Complexity makes people anxious. Simple narratives make them comfortable. This is philosophically dangerous. Truth is often nuanced. Justice often requires patience. Faith often requires restraint. Dajjal will offer shortcuts, quick solutions without moral struggle. And many will accept them because discipline feels heavy while surrender feels light. Perhaps one of the most overlooked reasons people will follow Dajjal is exhaustion, spiritual exhaustion, moral fatigue. Constant pressure wears people down. When a person is tired of resisting temptation, tired of holding boundaries, tired of struggling against their own desires, a voice that says rest, surrender, let go sounds merciful. But Islam teaches us that rest without righteousness is not peace, it is escape, and escape always comes with a cost. The Prophet also warned that Dajjal will appeal to emotions. He will exploit grief, nostalgia, longing. He will revive memories and manufacture hope. People broken by loss are vulnerable to anyone who promises restoration. This is why Islam emphasizes patience tied to faith, not hope detached from truth. Hope without guidance becomes desperation. Another critical factor is social pressure. Dajjal's influence will spread quickly. People will follow because others are following. Silence will feel safer than resistance. Questioning will feel dangerous, and many will convince themselves that they are not responsible. They are just adapting, but adaptation without principle is surrender. The believer is trained to resist this instinct. Islam does not promise ease, it promises meaning. It does not promise safety, it promises purpose, and this distinction matters. Those who follow Dajjal will often believe they are choosing the lesser evil. But Islam teaches us that compromising truth for comfort is never neutral. It reshapes the soul. This is why the Prophet focused on strengthening inner clarity before external chaos. A heart that knows what it stands for cannot be bought. A soul that trusts Allah cannot be intimidated. A believer who understands that life is a test does not panic when difficulty arrives. Dajjal attracts followers not because he is extraordinary, but because human weakness is predictable. And Islam does not shame this weakness, it prepares us for it. So the real lesson is not to ask, why would people follow him? The real lesson is to ask, what am I attached to? If your faith depends on ease, it will collapse under pressure. If your morality depends on safety, it will disappear in fear. If your loyalty depends on benefit, it will shift with power. But if your heart is anchored in Allah, no offer, no matter how attractive, will move you. And that is the reflection we must carry forward. The greatest protection from Dajjal is not knowing his promises, but knowing what you refuse to sell, no matter the price. When the Prophet warned us about Dajjal, he did not leave us exposed or helpless. Islam is not a religion that diagnoses danger without prescribing protection. In fact, what is remarkable is that the Prophet focused far more on how to protect yourself than on how to identify Dajjal This tells us something profound. The real battle is not external recognition, it is internal readiness. The believer is not saved by spotting deception early, but by becoming the kind of person deception cannot penetrate. The first and strongest protection against Dajjal is tawheed, pure, uncompromised belief in the oneness of Allah. This may sound simple, but it is deeply demanding. Tawheed is not just a statement on the tongue, it is a structure of the heart. It means Allah alone is the source of provision, protection, dignity, and success. As long as a person believes, even subtly, that safety comes from power, wealth, systems, or individuals, their tawheed is fragile. And fragile tawheed collapses under pressure. Dajjal's entire claim is built on replacing Allah in people's hearts. He does not say, stop believing in God. He says, believe in what I can give you. This is why Tawheed is so central. A heart that truly understands Tawheed cannot be blackmailed. You cannot threaten someone who believes their life, death, and provision are already written by Allah. You cannot bribe someone who knows that risk is not controlled by people. Tawheed creates a psychological independence that makes manipulation extremely difficult. This is also why the Prophet taught us to recite Surah Al-Kahf regularly. This is not symbolic. Surah Al-Kahf trains the mind to recognize deception in different forms. It speaks about young people who resisted societal pressure, about wealth that deceived its owner, about knowledge that required humility, and about power that was restrained by justice. These are not random stories. They are mental exercises. They condition the believer to question appearances, to resist arrogance, and to submit to Allah even when outcomes are unclear. Reciting Surah Al-Kahf without reflection is not protection. Internalizing its lessons is. The surah teaches you that truth is not always popular, that wealth is not proof of favor, that knowledge is dangerous without humility, and that power must be restrained by morality. These lessons are exactly what Dajjal will attack. So Allah gives us spiritual armor long before the battlefield appears. Another essential protection is knowledge, but not information. There is a difference. Information fills the mind, knowledge disciplines it. The Prophet warned that ignorance fuels fitnah, but he also warned that knowledge without sincerity becomes a test itself. A person who knows facts but lacks humility can become more vulnerable than someone who knows less but fears Allah more. This is why Islamic knowledge is always tied to character. Knowing about Dajjal is not enough. Knowing yourself is more important. Are you honest when lying benefits you? Are you just when injustice helps you? Are you patient when patience costs you? These daily choices build the spiritual muscles that resist major deception later. Dajjal will not break people suddenly. He will exploit habits they already have. The Prophet also emphasized constant remembrance of Allah. Dhikr is not just worship, it is mental grounding. In moments of pressure, fear, or confusion, the mind returns to what it is trained on. A person who remembers Allah in ease will remember Him in hardship. A person who forgets Allah when life is comfortable will forget Him completely when life becomes frightening. This is why the Prophet instructed believers to seek refuge from Dajjal in every prayer, not once in a lifetime. Not occasionally, every day. This repetition is intentional. It reinforces awareness. It humbles the believer. It reminds you that faith is not guaranteed and guidance is a gift that must be protected. Another protection is moral integrity. Dajjal thrives where ethics are flexible. A person who already justifies small compromises will justify larger ones later. Islam trains the believer to be consistent. Truth is truth even when inconvenient. Haram is haram even when normalized. Justice is justice even when unpopular. This consistency builds internal stability. Without it, fear dictates decisions. The Prophet did not tell believers to isolate themselves from the world, but he did warn against blind attachment to it. Attachment creates vulnerability. Detachment creates clarity. This does not mean abandoning responsibilities or society. It means refusing to let worldly outcomes define your values. Dajjal's leverage is the dunya. The less control the dunya has over your heart, the weaker his grip becomes. Another powerful protection is humility. Arrogance blinds. A person who believes I could never be fooled is already exposed. The companions, some of the greatest believers to ever live, feared hypocrisy for themselves. They did not assume safety, they pursued it. Humility keeps the heart soft, receptive, and alert. Arrogance makes it rigid and defensive. Community also matters. The Prophet emphasized jama'ah, not isolation. Fitnah is harder to resist alone. Honest companionship provides correction, grounding, and accountability. But this only works if the community itself values truth over comfort. A community that avoids difficult conversations becomes an echo chamber, and echo chambers amplify deception. At the same time, Islam warns against crowd psychology. Just because many people believe something does not make it true. The believer balances belonging with independence of conscience. You stand with people, but you stand for Allah. When the two conflict, Allah comes first. This balance is difficult, but it is essential. One of the most underestimated protections is patience. Dajjal offers quick relief. Islam offers long-term meaning. Patience is not passive. It is disciplined endurance. It is choosing to suffer with dignity rather than surrender with comfort. A patient believer understands that hardship is not abandonment. It is examination. The Prophet did not promise that believers would be spared from Dajjal's time. He promised that truth would survive it. This shifts the goal. Protection does not mean ease. It means remaining upright even when things collapse around you. Perhaps the most profound protection is sincerity. Iqtas cleans the heart of hidden motives. A person who worships Allah for status, recognition, or identity is vulnerable. A person who worships Allah for Allah alone cannot be redirected. Sincerity aligns the inner world with the outer actions, and alignment creates resilience. All of these protections point to one truth. Resisting Dajjal is not about reacting to a future event. It is about preparing a present self. The believer who strengthens Tawheed, disciplines the soul, guards ethics, seeks knowledge with humility, and remembers Allah consistently is already walking away from Dajjal, long before he appears. And this leads us to a final reflection that must not be ignored. If our faith collapses under small pressures today, it will not survive greater pressures tomorrow. Preparation is not dramatic. It is quiet, consistent, and often unseen. So begin now. Strengthen what you believe, correct what you excuse, purify what you hide, because when deception comes in its most convincing form, it will not be defeated by panic or intelligence, but by a heart that already belongs completely to Allah. After all the warnings, after all the descriptions of deception, fear, pressure, and compromise, Islam does not leave the believer in anxiety. It does not end the story with Dajjal standing victorious over humanity. In fact, the final chapters of this narrative are not about falsehood's strength, but about its fragility. No matter how convincing deception becomes, no matter how powerful it appears, Islam makes one truth absolutely clear: falsehood has an expiry date. And its end comes not through chaos, but through justice. The coming of Isa as is not merely an event on a timeline, it is a restoration of moral balance. Dajjal represents distortion, of truth, of authority, of worship. Isa as represents clarity. He does not arrive with slogans or propaganda. He arrives with truth that needs no exaggeration. His presence itself exposes falsehood, because deception cannot survive in the presence of sincerity. One of the most powerful lessons in this final phase is that Dajjal is not defeated by armies, technology, or mass movements. He is defeated by truth embodied in a servant of Allah. This alone should reshape how we understand victory. Islam does not teach that truth wins because it shouts louder, but because it stands firmer. Dajjal collapses not when people argue with him, but when his claim is confronted by reality. Isa as does not come to introduce a new religion or ideology. He comes to restore justice, to correct distortions, and to affirm Tawheed. This is deeply significant. It tells us that the ultimate victory is not innovation, it is return to worshipping Allah alone. Return to humility, return to moral clarity. Falsehood thrives on complexity and confusion. Truth simplifies. The defeat of Dajjal also teaches us that Allah allows deception to rise only to expose it completely. Partial exposure creates doubt. Complete exposure creates certainty. When Dajjal is destroyed, there is no ambiguity left. People will see clearly what they chose, what they followed, and what they sacrificed. And this moment is not just about the fall of one individual. It is about the collapse of every lie that promised salvation without Allah. But here is where the lesson becomes deeply personal. The victory over Dajjal is not just something that happens at the end of time. It is something that happens inside hearts long before that. When a believer chooses truth over comfort, they participate in that victory. When someone refuses to compromise faith for safety, they echo the stand that Isa as represents. The final defeat is a culmination of countless individual acts of sincerity. Another profound insight is that justice returns not as revenge, but as balance. Islam does not glorify vengeance, it glorifies accountability. Dajjal is not destroyed out of hatred. He is removed because his existence contradicts truth itself. This is important because it reminds believers that anger is not the engine of justice. Clarity is. After the defeat of Dajjal, the world does not instantly become perfect, but it becomes honest. False claims lose credibility. Exploitation loses justification. Worship returns to Allah without competition. This reminds us that the ultimate problem of humanity was never lack of intelligence or resources, it was misplaced devotion. Dajjal exploited that, Isa as corrects it. The final phase also teaches us something humbling. No matter how strong falsehood looks, it is always temporary. The Qur'an repeatedly describes falsehood as something that rises like foam, visible, loud, and impressive, only to disappear when the current settles. Truth, on the other hand, remains quietly beneficial. This is not poetic language, it is a psychological reality. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth stands on its own. This should give the believer immense calm. You are not responsible for defeating falsehood globally. You are responsible for not surrendering to it personally. Allah does not ask you to control outcomes. He asks you to protect integrity. The final victory belongs to Allah. Your victory lies in loyalty. The coming of Isa as also corrects a dangerous misconception that justice will come only through force. Islam teaches that moral authority is stronger than coercion. Isa as does not dominate hearts through fear. Falsehood already tried that. He restores hearts through truth. This is a powerful reminder for believers today. If your methods contradict your message, you are not restoring justice. You are distorting it. Another critical lesson is that even the greatest trials have a conclusion. Fitnah feels endless when you are inside it. Fear convinces you that compromise is permanent, but Islam insists that no test lasts forever. Relief may not come when you want it, but it comes when it has done its work. The believer is not crushed by trials, they are refined by them. The destruction of Dajjal also confirms that Allah's promise is real. Many people lose faith not because they disbelieve, but because they become impatient. They want justice now, clarity now, relief now, but Allah's timing is precise, not delayed. When truth finally prevails, it does so completely. This should change how we live today. If you believe that truth ultimately wins, you do not need to lie to succeed. If you believe justice ultimately returns, you do not need to be unjust to survive. If you believe Allah's promise is certain, you do not need to panic when falsehood appears dominant. The final victory also reminds us that belief is not proven in comfort, but in resistance. The people who stand firm before Isa as arrives are not spectators. They are participants. They kept faith alive when it was inconvenient. They refused to normalize compromise. They protected sincerity when deception was attractive. Their reward is not only survival, it is honor, and here is perhaps the most powerful closing reflection of all. Dajjal's story ends not with fear, but with clarity. The believer is not meant to live in anxiety, scanning the horizon for signs. They are meant to live with purpose, strengthening faith, refining character, and trusting Allah's promise. Because when the dust settles, when deception collapses, and when truth stands unobstructed, only one question will matter, not who followed Dajjal, but who remained faithful when it was hardest to do so. So stand firm, choose truth daily, anchor your heart in Allah, because the final victory does not belong to those who were loudest in opposition, but to those who were quietest in sincerity, and Allah is always with those who remain true.